Am I there? There we go. Amen. I love that song. Pulled right out of Ezekiel 37. That's us. Dry bones come alive. That's us. Pulled right out of our graves, our eternal graves, and given new life. Isn't that, that is such a blessing to remember, and so I'm glad that that song exists, that somebody is able to write songs like that, because it would never be. I did forget a couple of prayer requests. I know we have a couple of Vikings fans in the room, so pray for them. That was embarrassing yesterday, so.
So it's not making At least we made it.
That's true. Okay, well, you know. As long as the Packers lose today, we're okay, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, if you haven't been with us, we are in a series in the book of Mark. I said we'd be picking it back up this week, and so here we are. We're going to pick it back up. When we left this series, we were in chapter 7, and I said in chapter 8, it's going to be special because chapter 8 is the first of two confessions that we find in the book of Mark that are pivotal points. And this first one, we're going to hear Peter. And it's interesting because what we're going to do is chapter 8, we're going to do 2 weeks of chapter 8. So you can reread this chapter as your homework for next week. I'm doing that because I want to highlight two aspects of Mark chapter 8, and I think they're both very important moving forward. I'm not just trying to squeeze a little bit extra out of Mark 8. This isn't The Hobbit or the seventh Harry Potter book that they split into two just so they could get extra money. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm doing it because it's very important that we hit these two things up, and I couldn't get them all into one sermon. So this is what we're doing this morning. So Mark 8 this morning. How many of you guys did the homework? Have been doing the homework? Okay. I feel like the holidays kind of spoiled us, so I want to see a whole lot more hands next week saying, I read chapter 8, okay? So make sure you read chapter 8. So I got my first pair of glasses when I was, I want to say like 8 or 9 years old. My grandma actually was the one that took me. She took me to this department store in Elkhart, and they had an optometrist in there, and they had my eyes checked. And I remember distinctly how the doctor put that like terrifying machine in front of my face. You gotta put your chin on the little thing, and you gotta look through the little eye holes, and I had to look through 100 lenses, it felt like. And the doctor would stand there and he'd click it, and he's like, is this clear? Or is this clear? And then I'd say, I don't know, I can't tell the difference. And then he'd say, okay, is this clearer? Or is this clearer? No, you don't understand. I have no idea. They all look the same. How about this? Okay, that's clear. And then he would block one eye, and then I'd look and I'd see another thing through one eye, and then he'd do the same thing. And it was crazy. And I was like, how in the world does this person know what glasses I need just by doing this? I still think it's magic, by the way. I still don't know that it's science. But by the time we're done there, I picked out some frames, and we had to come back in a week because this was the 1990s, the early 90s. So now I think you go and you get a pair of glasses, and they've got them an hour later. But no, I had to come back in a week to get them, and then they had to do the final fitting because they were the big, ugly plastic frames. Because that's what we all had, right? And by the time we got my glasses and we left the following week, I could not believe the difference. As a little 8 or 9-year-old, I think I was 9, people had lines on their faces. I could see people's the crow's feet in the corner of your eyes. Trees had individual leaves. I didn't know that. I thought they looked like the pictures that kids draw of trees, where it's just a cloud that's just colored green. No, there's actual individual leaves. That's crazy. Everything looked sharp. Everything looked great. I suppose the lack of high definition television didn't help the situation, because seeing things on TV just looked like they did through my eyeballs. So like, I don't know if maybe if we had high definition TV, I would have noticed the difference before and gotten my eyes checked earlier. But the fact is, I had no idea what I wasn't seeing until I got those glasses. No idea. I was completely clueless as to what I was not seeing properly. This morning we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. We're going to read a story about Jesus healing someone and the clarity that results from that. But not just the clarity for that individual, but the clarity for his disciples. And my hope is that when we're done this morning, our vision of who Jesus is will be a little clearer as well. So before we get into our text, I want to look at some context, because context is key. So back in chapter 6, we see Jesus. If you roll back to chapter 6, and I think in verses 30 through like 44, you don't need to go there, we're not going to read it. But you see that Jesus feeds a group of 5,000 people. And immediately after that, we see Jesus get in a boat after doing the walking on the water thing. And then during that incident, we're told that the disciples didn't understand the walking on the water thing because they didn't understand the lesson given during the previous miracle. It says he got in the boat. This is chapter 6, verse 51. He got in the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded because they didn't understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Now that's an interesting thing to say, because really the opposite is then true. They would have understood the walking on the water thing had they understood the thing about the bread. It's just an odd turn of phrase. And then in chapter 7, we see that Jesus has some words with the Pharisees and scribes. He has another conversation with his boys and tells them that the Pharisees and their religion are bad news bears, and the disciples have a little trouble understanding what Jesus is saying, and so then he has to clarify it for them. So finally, at the end of chapter 7, Jesus cures a deaf man, and he gives him the ability to hear properly. So in chapter 8, we see Jesus feed another large crowd. Verses 1 through, I think, 10, he feeds another large crowd. Then, once again, he has some warnings about the Pharisees for the disciples. They don't quite get it, so they bicker about who was supposed to bring bread. So you can almost see the frustration on Jesus' face now. This is the second time he's fed a huge crowd of thousands of people with a couple of loaves of bread, and he's all like, how many people did I feed the first time? Like 5,000. And how much was left over? Like 12 baskets. Okay. And then the second time I did that, you remember that? That was yesterday. Like the second time I did it, how many were there? Like 4,000-ish people. Okay, and how many were left over that time? Like 7 baskets. Okay. Guys, do you think I'm worried about bread? Do you think I'm worried about bread? I'm the bread maker. I make bread. It's what I do. In fact, later in another gospel, he's going to say, I am the bread of life. I'm the bread. Like, if you come to me, you don't need to eat again. This is it. And so they're bickering. It's just further proof that they're just not quite getting it. They're just not quite getting it. And there's a pattern here. Jesus feeds a crowd. Then he has a run-in with the Pharisees. He teaches the disciples something they don't quite understand. And then what's next? Jesus heals someone. And the last time he healed a deaf guy. This time it's someone who's blind. I'm absolutely convinced that if they didn't get it this time, he was going to feed another group. Only that group was probably going to be like 10,000 people. And then he was going to do some other weird miracle. And then he was going to have another run-in with the Pharisees. And then he's going to explain it again. Because he wants the disciples to understand what he's doing. And so that brings us to our text this morning. So if you have your Bibles with you, and I hope you do bring your Bible to church, please join me in Mark 8:22. We're going to go just through verse 26 for right now. Just through verse 26. And they came to Bethsaida, And see, people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he'd spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and he said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." And then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again. He opened his eyes, and his sight was restored. And he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Okay, so here's what we have. Jesus and the disciples have made their way to Bethsaida. And some folks decide they should bring their blind friend to him and beg Jesus to touch him. So Jesus takes him outside the village, and he spits on his eyes. Okay, that's a little weird. That is not what my eye doctor did, just so you know. When I went to the eye doctor, he did not spit on my eyes. I don't know if I'd ever gone back to that guy. I don't know if I ever did, but I wouldn't have if I had the choice. It's not really a normally healing method, but whatever. So, of course, like the deaf guy and all the other people who Jesus has healed so far in the book of Mark, the guy opens his eyes and immediately things are good, right? All good. No. Jesus asked him, can you see? See, this is the only time we see Jesus ask a person, "Are you healed?" Usually he says, "You're healed." Remember the guy on the mat that came down through the roof? He says, "You're healed. Pick up your mat and just get out of here." And the guy gets up and he rolls up his mat and he leaves. That's not what happens here. Jesus actually asks the question. This is on purpose. He wants to know, "Are you healed yet?" And the deaf guy's like, I see people, but they look like trees walking around. Now, here's a couple of things. One, we know now that this guy has not been blind from birth, because he at least has a framework for knowing what trees look like. And the second thing is, Jesus really goofed on this one. This miracle is like half-baked. What is the deal, Jesus? Dead people and weather, no problem. No problem whatsoever. Guy's withered hand, not a problem. This deaf guy totally can hear. This blind guy, a little too much, Jesus? A little too much, huh? I assure you that is not what's happening here. Jesus didn't make a mistake. He didn't have a goof up. He didn't forget the recipe. He knows how to heal people. He's doing this on purpose. And like other miracles in this book, we see that this one is not so much this one is as much for the disciples as for the man in the story. This one is for the benefit of the disciples. He wants them to learn, maybe even more for them than for this guy. Remember what's happening here. The disciples are having trouble putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Their vision is faulty. So just like when I was a kid, this guy's having trouble seeing clearly. And so are the disciples. The disciples are having trouble seeing clearly. They need correction. See, I go to the doctor and I get correction for my poor vision. And believe me, it's the worst. So Jesus lays his hands on the man again. And the guy opens his eyes and he says, "Wait, now I can see." His sight was restored. And you can almost see Jesus looking at the disciples like, "Are you getting it now? Are you getting it now? You need a tune-up." We've been through this cycle twice. You've seen me feed people with almost nothing. You've seen me handle the Pharisees handily. You've seen me heal people. The answer to who I am is staring you right in the face. So, let's see if the disciples get it. Let's see if they get it. Let's go to verse 27, and we're gonna read just through verse 28 real quick. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." So here's the thing. he decides to take him on a nice long walk after this. After this miracle of healing somebody's eyesight, he says, let's go for a walk. We're going to go to Caesarea Philippi. It's a solid 2-hour drive from Bethsaida, which means it's a good day or so. It's like 25 miles. It's a day's journey on foot. To let that lesson sink in. And in the middle of the walk, Jesus says, I think it's time to ask these guys where they're at with stuff. I want to get an assessment of where they're at. What he's trying to do is probably figure out how many more people do I need to feed? How many more of these feedings do I have to do? How many more people do I have to heal before they start to get it? So that's probably why he's asking. Just me spitballing right there. Like I think that's probably what's happening. Like, okay, do I really need to do this again? So he asks him, who do people say that I am? And he gets a whole bunch of different answers. A whole bunch of different answers. Well, some people say that you're John the Baptist. Well, John the Baptist literally just died like 2 chapters ago. So, probably not. Maybe people are saying that, but only the ignorant ones who didn't know that they were living at the same time. Some people say you're Elijah returned. That, the prophecy about Elijah returning, this is you. Or just one of the other random prophets. You're just a prophet. And here's the thing, it's not much different right now, is it? If you ask a random person on the street who's not a Christian who Jesus is, and the answers are going to be all over the map. Heck, even if you ask some people who are Christians, your answers might be all over the map. They might be all over the map. They might say, well, he's a good teacher. Or they might say he's a prophet or a good person. You might hear that he's a make-believe story. You might hear that, well, he was a good guy and all, but he wasn't God. You might hear things like he's the Son of God. You might hear he's the Messiah. You might hear all kinds of weird things. And so here the disciples are saying that people are calling him John the Baptist or a prophet, but the problem with those answers is that they're inadequate to describe his nature. They're inadequate. Is it true that Jesus engaged in prophecy? Yes. Is it true that he's a good teacher? Well, absolutely. For sure. But is it adequate to say he's just a good teacher? Is it adequate to say that he's just a prophet? No. So a prophet was someone who brought a message from God. Turn in with me to Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 through 2. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. So he says, long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. It is inadequate to say that Jesus was a good man or a messenger from God. He is the message. He's the one that God has been speaking of through the prophets. Also, here's a shameless plug for the Wednesday night Bible study. We've just begun a study in the book of Hebrews. So if you're not doing much on Wednesday nights, and I assume that most of you aren't, we'd love to have you join us. Please join us as we look into what makes Jesus superior. What makes Jesus the message? What is it about him that makes him better than all others? So if you're not doing anything on Wednesday nights, please come. John echoes this idea in his gospel when he calls Jesus the Word. He's the Word, the message. John 1:1, or John chapter 1. He says he's the Word. He's the message. God has not sent another prophet. He hasn't sent a good teacher. He sent his Son to communicate who he is. And by the way, in Hebrews chapter 1, in verses 3 and 4, he says that Jesus is the exact imprint of God's nature. He's one with the Father. Jesus made that same claim about himself. I and the Father, we are one. If you know me, you know the Father. So Jesus, he hears these inadequate answers, and he wants to know if the disciples are getting any more from his teaching and miracles than the rest of these people. Are you getting more than the rest of the people out of what I'm doing? That's what he wants to know. And I think it's the question we have to ask ourselves this morning. Are we getting more out of this teaching, out of these Gospels, than the rest of the people who call him a good teacher or a prophet? Are we getting it? So he hears them and he says, I want to know what you think. So he asks the group, who do they think he is? Who do you say that I am then? And Peter being the bold guy that he is, he says, you are the Christ. You are the Christ. So remember me telling you back when we first started this journey through Mark that the gospel revolves around two distinct and important confessions. This is the first one. This is the first one. The Jewish people were waiting for their Messiah. They were waiting for somebody to come and set them free. But they had a little bit of a different idea on what that would look like. Now, Peter and the rest of the disciples probably still aren't aware all the way. They're probably still not all the way there yet. Jesus knows there's still more work to be done to have them understand his true nature. To get them from, you are the Christ, you're the Messiah, all the way to where the writer of Hebrews is. You're not just the Christ and the Messiah, you are one with the Father. There's some work to be done there. But this is a start. This is a huge start. We have a confession that Jesus is the Messiah. The one who will rescue his people. And Peter has understood it now. But there's a little degree of difference. Peter is still thinking like the religious elites here. And this probably explains why Jesus said, hey, you guys need to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. He says that because the Pharisees' teaching is still kind of on the forefront of their minds. This is what they've been taught since they were little. So Peter's idea of what the Messiah is looks a little different than what Jesus' idea of the Messiah is. They think that the Messiah is going to be a political or military figure who will liberate Israel. And we know, because hopefully you've read to the end of the story by now, that Jesus was more than that. He's not just a man sent by God, he is the true nature of God. So even though there's been a slight adjustment, there's still more to be done. Now, you know, as I've gotten older, every couple of years, I have to go get my eyes checked again. And many of those times, I need a new, stronger prescription. My eyes continue to fail, and I continue to need correction. My eyes continue to fail, I continue to need correction. And the fact is that even though we now know who Jesus is, we still often need correction for our vision. We still often need, if our sight was super sharp, then we'd have less trouble trusting him instead of trying to do things in our own strength. If we saw clearly who Jesus was, maybe we'd put less trust in political figures and more trust in him. If we were able to keep our focus, maybe we'd have less stress and anxiety. And these are things that I'm very familiar with in my life. I have stress and anxiety. And it's because sometimes I don't get my eyes checked. I don't go here and check my eyes. Make sure that I understand who Jesus is. And that I carry that with me. I don't forget it during the week. That I don't forget it next month. That I continually go back here to know, hey, this is what Jesus looks like. This is who he is. And that's the work of sanctification. Just like Jesus continued to work with the disciples and show them who he was, he does the same with us. He does that with us. We have the Bible to guide us. We have an open line of communication with God. As we immerse ourselves in those things, we gain correction for our faulty vision. Sometimes God asks us those questions. Is it clear now? Is it clear now? How about now? Is this better or is this better? And that's what Jesus did with his disciples. That's why he performed this miracle with this guy. How's your vision right now? Well, it's not what I expected. I thought that I would be cured, but I mean, it's a start. Jesus, thanks for that. It's not quite as sharp as it could be, I guess. And Jesus is saying, come on, guys. Come on, guys. I know you can do it. I know there's work left to be done, but I know you can get there. And so he heals the guy all the way. And then Peter puts it together. You're the Christ. You're the Messiah. You're the one that came to set us free, but his idea of what that would look like was vastly different from what Jesus is going to say that it's going to look like in the next part of this chapter that we'll get to next week. But it's a vastly different look at what the Messiah is. But that's the work of sanctification. Just like Jesus continued to work on the disciples and show them who he was, he does the same with us. We just, as we do these things, as we come to church, as we grow, as we learn, as we meet with other believers, hopefully our vision continues to get better and better and better. That we see Jesus clearer and clearer all the time. Now, if you're not sure about this, if you're not sure that's true, we have a promise from 1 Corinthians 13:12 that says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face." He said, talking about when we get there. When God says, it's time to come home, y'all, and we go home, he says, then I will see him face to face. Right now, I know in part. I only know part of it. I'm not getting all of it yet. But then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. This is a promise that someday all the infirmities of our vision will be cured. All the lack of trust will be cured. All the lack of love will be cured. We'll understand, we'll see, we will be cured of our eyesight. And like the man in the story, we'll see clearly who Jesus is. We'll understand the work that's been done. It will have an eternal impact on us. But until that day comes, we probably need to go regularly for checkups. We probably need to go regularly for checkups. By the way, another little plug. The Optometrists Association of America, or whatever you want to call them, they say that you should get your eyes checked once a year, especially if you wear glasses, so try to do that. But we probably need to use whatever is at our disposal to improve our eyesight as much as possible until then.